We're excited to be able to share some great news to counties across the state. And what we're going to do is sort of do this in two stages. The first half will be more of a state overview, what it's going to look like from a TDOT perspective through the Transportation Modernization Act of 2023. And then the second part will dive a little deeper into the impact on counties in particular. And we'll open it to questions here in a little bit. I do not claim to know all the nuances on the state side, so I'm just going to give a brief overview of what passed as part of this this amazing package that, while it doesn't solve all of our transportation problems in Tennessee, it goes a long way toward addressing and identifying many of those. One of the things it does for TDOT is allows them to deal with congestion, particularly in urban areas of the state. And if you really get down to it, first and foremost at the top of that list is going to be the Nashville-Davidson County area, where just in my career, congestion has gone from my drive being about 35 to 40 minutes on average. Now it's an hour to an hour and 15 using the same roads. And the rush hour in and out of this downtown area starts by 5:30, 6 in the morning, and honestly doesn't end until about that time in the evening. So it'll allow them to do such things as choice lanes. You are going to hear back and forth, sometimes calling those toll roads. What the effect is, it will create brand new lanes that would be above and beyond what already exists on an interstate corridor, for instance. If there are 3 lanes going in one direction today, if TDOT decides that there needs to be a choice lane or lanes in that same area, it will be number 4 and number 5, for instance. They're not going to take existing lanes and suddenly start charging folks to use those. The idea is to add capacity, and in order to do that, they would add lanes, but they would be restricted to those who are willing to pay a little bit, and those are going to vary over time, depending on the time of day, all sorts of factors, including volume, time of day, emergency situations, backups, those kinds of things. So that's in a nutshell. It's going to primarily help those urban areas. One of the things that it also allows you to do is address such other issues as public transportation, where you can actually create these choice corridors where you might have alternate transportation methods such as pedestrian rail or bike lanes and things like that on the so they're still diving into that, all of those possibilities, I should say it that way. And they're looking at different places across the country, Dallas, Fort Worth, parts of Virginia, and others that already have these types of things in place. They want to be able to mirror those, but also to make them better and make them Tennessee, let them fit here. One of the things that they want to expand upon is TDOT already has a limited ability to use alternate delivery methods. They can do about 4 projects a year, and that's it. And what they're finding is just in those few projects, you can quantify about a $22 million savings within TDOT's budget by streamlining things, by getting folks in the same room at the same time talking about the same project. They want to be able to do that more widespread. So I think they've tripled that number that they can do those kinds of delivery methods. The idea is to turn what is today on average of an 11-year project from the time the road is conceived, first discussed, and goes through the approval process. It goes from one desk, sits there for a certain amount of time before it moves on to the other. And it goes through this incredibly lengthy process. So what happens is from conception to end, it's as much as 15 years. Well, obviously, if I'm building a house and I start with the foundation, or even pre-foundation, if I start on the plans now, and it takes me 11 to 15 years to actually get to that building process, the cost is going to skyrocket. Same concept with this road project. They want to be able to get it in process, through the process, approved and delivered before they run out of money. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in a few minutes. But those are the main things that are directly going to affect TDOT. In a more general sense, the Modernization Act actually amounts to a $3.5 billion general fund transfer. The surplus revenues that have accumulated over the last year, we're talking multi-billion dollars. The governor and TDOT proposed to use a piece of that to deal with transportation infrastructure. What that amounts to is $3 billion of that will be divided in fourths. So $750 million will go to each TDOT region across the state. There are 4 regions. So you're going to see those start dealing with such things as the Improve Act projects that were written into law back in 2017 when it was passed. Those have become a bit stagnant because the money ran out. Remember what I said earlier about the 11 to 15-year process. Just simple economy issues, inflation, that type of thing. The cost of doing much greater. So what they had hoped would last for 10 years actually wound up lasting only about 5 to 6 years. So this will jumpstart even more Improve Act projects. It'll help with rural interstate widening. Again, the congestion areas, those kinds of things. As part of all this, it allows TDOT some flexibility in the way they can finance these projects. Tennessee historically, at least over the last 40 to 50 years, has not borrowed money like many other states to finance their roads. We're a pay-as-you-go state in that regard. In order to leverage that $3 billion, the legislature approved the ability for TDOT to, through a brand new board of experts, to enter into what's called public-private partnerships that would allow private financing of public roads. Now, a lot has been said, a lot of questions have been asked. If you allow private partnerships, then who owns the roads? Who at the end of the day maintains them? For how long does a private entity control? It is written into the language, and it's public, obviously. It's very specific that at no time in this process and at any time during the process, the state can exercise its control and ownership of its assets, those roads. So it offers the flexibility to finance over time. Obviously, the private entities will need to be able to make a profit. So at the end of the day, you'll see some of those fees will actually be going to those private entities, but eventually it will revert back entirely to the state to control. The entire time, the state will be able to negotiate contracts with those private partners for anything from maintenance to, again, financing that type of thing. So in a nutshell, that's it on the state side of things. I said originally that this is a $3.3 billion bill. When Senator Massey and Representative Howell were moving it through the committee process, it was very clear that they wanted to, and legislators wanted to, provide some type of financial assistance to county governments for transportation needs. It was a matter of how much in the process. One of the things when I met with my board, when we first started hearing rumblings more than a year ago that something might be coming out of the governor's office and TDOT on this issue, we tried to get our ducks in a row and use CTAS a great deal to get data in front of us so that we could have informative discussions with legislators and anybody, honestly, who would listen to us. But we had no idea that $3.3 billion that we would be looking from a county standpoint at $300 million of that in the form of one-time funding. What my board and membership a year ago talked about is we wanted to make sure that we pushed for both short-term improvements in funding as well as long-term, because we do have the exact same inflationary issues that TDOT is experiencing. We face those of the same magnitude at the local level. So we got the best of both worlds in this Transportation Modernization Act. I'll talk about the first one, and we'll call it short term. This is the $300 million one-time funding, and it was very appropriate. I'm not surprised that it went into an existing effective program that we already use year in and year out, the state aid road program. For the last, since the 1980s, approximately $21 million has been appropriated to that fund and divided among county highway departments, formula-based solution. 50% of the pot goes equally to all counties. 25% of the pot is based on population. The remaining 25% is based on land area of the county. It's already audited. It has rules. It's got guidelines. And while it's not an imperfect program, it is one that, again, I say is very effective. So what we see on July 1 of 2023 is that entire 300 million plus our regular 21 million that we receive each year will be put into this pot, this state aid road program. It's divided up the exact same way. It is utilized the same way or accessed the same way by the highway department. You create an annual work plan that's due each year by October typically. And in fact, at the end of the month, while we are in Sevier County for our legislative conference, many highway officials, you will see them meeting with their state aid coordinators, going over those plans already. Now, I said the annual work plan, so that's typically 1 year. The one major stipulation that that TDOT is asking us to follow with this new money, as well as going forward, is to actually do the annual work plan like we always have, but go ahead and look at the next 2 years beyond that. So in effect, we're looking at 3 years of projects on paper. The first year we'll sign off on just like we always do. And that's what we hope will be implemented, contracts let, and all of that. But we've already looked at the next 2 years. A year from now, we're going to do the exact same thing. And it's a rolling 3-year program. So it creates a way for us to think ahead, start planning and looking ahead toward our projects long term. But it also creates a paper trail of data and creates a data set for us, because 300 million, as fabulous as a number as that might sound, it's going to be spent eventually. We need to create data along the way in this process that shows that how we used it, where we used it, and the fact that we have other needs beyond this $300 million. So all of the other state aid road guidelines remain the same. Nothing changes in the process at this point. We're continuing to negotiate some peripheral issues along the way, but those are more long-term that we're dealing with. So, but the bottom line is this is money that effectively is 15 years of brand new money in a single year. There is a legislative reporting component, and I'll go back to what I said just a minute ago. The legislature wants to know, above anything else, where's the money being spent, how's it being spent, how quickly and how efficiently. They want a great level of accountability, and this program offers it already, and that's one of the reasons they like it so much. They want to know that we can do what we have said from the beginning, and that's to use it wisely on their behalf on our roads. One of the caveats that they did include in the law, they started asking about how we felt about maintenance of effort and supplanting types of issue. And they wanted to make it incredibly clear that if the state is going to put 300 million into county highway departments, that local governments were not going to pull back any of its funding to supplant what or allow the state money to supplant local. So that is an additional consideration during the budget process. Are going to come to you and they're going to report to you that they have a plan to spend this money. Just know that as far as any local funding that you provide today, that the law is very clear. What you have done to this point will continue. You cannot pull it back. All of that said is that, again, it creates that paper trail to help us to make the argument that county governments as a whole have major transportation needs across the state. Counties maintain more than 61,000 total road miles, and that's more than TDOT maintains in any given year. Now, about 20% of that, 15,000 or so, is considered to be in this state aid system. So it is the connector roads that moves people and products and farm produce from more rural areas to where they need to be to market, to their people's jobs, to trade centers, and those types of things. At the end of the day, we need to remember that while TDOT is talking about documented $26 to $30 billion of transportation needs across the state, $2 billion on top of that, TASR has identified as the county transportation needs. So 300 million is not going to go very far. So it's the point being that we'll have to make our case again that we have continuing needs. And I think that this reporting requirement that we have is going to help us to show the long-term unmet funding need that we have. So that's the short-term side of things. That's the grant. That's very specific use. And that is on those state aid road connector road and routes. The second part, and I'm probably as excited about that as I am the other, even though it's smaller money today. A long-term solution arose through a great deal of study and talk over the last few years. And that was, how are we going to deal with electric vehicles in all shapes, forms, whether it's a strictly electric vehicle or if it's a hybrid or plug-in, any version of an electric vehicle, EV, along the way, knowing that they are on the roads just like the combustible engines that are commonplace. These are going along with it. You'll see more and more of those EVs on the road. In fact, Tennessee has become a hub for electric vehicle production, from the latest being Ford, GM, Volkswagen, Nissan, been here for a long time. They all four of them are or will be shortly building major product lines of EVs within our borders. So when we went to TDOT and originally, when we heard that this bill was coming, our ask was just very simple. Let us be part of the solution. As I mentioned earlier, state gasoline motor fuel revenues, that's the biggest part of the pot of money that both TDOT and county highway departments rely on year in, year out to fund our operations. Well, the bottom line is that this year, it just so happens that we're looking at a deficit in that line item. When I say deficit, March collections, that's the most recent available as of today, we are already down $1.1 million over this time last year. So we're looking at least $1.5 million by the end of this fiscal year that we're going to be short. That may not seem significant, but the upward trend coming out of the pandemic and pre-pandemic growth, we had anticipated a little bit more significant increase in those revenues. By the end of this fiscal year, we're probably not going to meet those projections in any way. In fact, we'll be $6 million less than what we had projected this time last year. So every little bit helps. TDOT is looking at about 4 times that $1.5 million loss in a single year. So while that matters is, like I said, when we went to TDOT, we just asked for a way for us to be part of the solution. We were able to, through some education, enlighten them as to where we are financially long-term. And I'll be honest with you, that was a meeting on I believe it was a Thursday afternoon, but with the commissioner, Commissioner Butch Ely, and some of his staff. By the next morning at a breakfast, he had already talked to the governor, and the two of them had agreed that that was absolutely in the cards, that creating parity meant creating parity for everybody, not just the state. So they did include us in their solution. Just a couple of other facts that as to why this matters is, just the purchasing power, cost of oil, fuel, other things in the highway department have gone up 25 to 50% over a year ago. And another consideration that has been talked a great deal about, fuel efficiency is a tremendous thing. We need to be able to get further with our vehicles, absolutely. But the public policy effect is the greater period between fuel ups, refills, it equates to fewer tax revenues being generated. So we're creating a gap where motor fuel vehicles revenues are going down at a rate that we've got to close that gap. One of the things, and I'm going to see if I can get David to help me and share a chart. The solution that the governor and TDOT introduced was a vehicle registration fee And this is the end product. It went through a lot of gyrations over time, and but this is where it was landed. Started out being closer to $300 a year for a registration fee. This is the schedule. We don't start this until January 1st of 2024. We don't get to start sharing. So we cannot bank right this minute on at least only a half year's worth of collections. And those are going to be new to us. Why is this significant? There is currently a $100 a year registration fee, but 100% of that goes to TDOT for their funds. Like I said earlier, creating parity, they agreed to share in each one of those fees. So every time an electric vehicle, and there's a statutory definition, and it's an electric motor, and that is the sole means of propulsion. It'll be a $200 a year fee. One of the things that they did negotiate, and while we're not happy with it, it's still the end result is positive for counties, is it is paid at the time of renewal, not at the time of the purchase of that vehicle. So if I go out tomorrow and get a brand new EV, I'm not going to pay that $200 fee on top of my regular registration until a year. I'll pay my regular stuff, but I don't pay the $200 for 1 year. So it becomes a staggered collection system. Hybrids, plug-ins have different statutory definitions as well. The key is, remember back with the Improve Act, one of the things proposed, but they did not have the political will to pass it, was to index what those collections might be. So what was implemented is it until the legislature walks back in and decides to increase from, say, 26 cents to 27 or 28. On Transportation Modernization Act, they did effectively index the vehicle registration fees. So in year 5, beginning January 1st of 2028, you see that it goes up by as much as 3%, and it's tied to a federal CPI that's defined by the Department of Labor. So, but again, all those are shared beginning in January of 24. So now, I would love to be able to tell you it's going to create an exact amount of money to start. I wish I could, but there are so many moving parts in that area that make it a bit difficult. What I will say is this: there are groups here in Tennessee that are working very hard at expanding the EV population, the registered population of vehicles on the roads in Tennessee. Today, as of the last day of December of 22, just a few months ago, there were about 26,000 total EVs in Tennessee. The group Drive Electric TN has as its mission to expand that to 200,000 EVs by 2028. So that's an incredible exponential growth in EVs. So it's important that we got ahead of this, and that was part of the strategy, to be quite honest with you. They wanted to, while the iron was hot, folks wanted to move on something. It also impacts fewer than 26,000 people today. If they had waited 2 years, 5 years, you're looking at a greater number of people who might have balked at the idea of suddenly having to pay of an additional registration fee. So I'll wrap it up here and open it to questions. Cannot say enough about the sponsors of the bill. Senator Massey, Representative Howell were fantastic to work with. They were very receptive during this entire process. And as they would do, as they ushered this through the process, they would boil it down to the county impact being simply put. The short term is one-time contracts of $300 million. We know that that is eventually going to go away. It will be spent at the discretion of highway departments. Some of them are telling me they'd like to spend it within the first 6 months. Others, it realistically is going to take a few years. The other aspect is the long term. The electric vehicle registrations, that's the operating money that's going to keep our highway doors open. It's going to pay the light bill. It's going to pay for the equipment, the personnel, those kinds of things. And that we could not continue to sustain strictly on fuel tax revenues. So it's a little early to estimate what that might bring in. I will say the early estimates have the county portion for the first half of next year might be in the ballpark of 1 million or so, just from those EV registrations, but we will have to wait and see. So David, if you're all right, I'll stop there. And I know I've thrown a lot at everybody, but hopefully you've got some questions that I'm able to answer.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to post something in the chat, we can go there, or just unmute yourself. You should be able to speak up.
Well, I know we've got several highway superintendents on this webinar, and I'll share this with them in particular. If you've got any other questions about the state aid road process that's going to be talked about at length at our legislative conference at the end of this month, we actually have the deputy commissioner who is now in charge of the state aid program. Preston Elliott is on the agenda along with Lisa Dunn with that program. They're going to be talking at length, but also do not hesitate. If you get off of this webinar, pick up the phone and call your state aid coordinator just to follow up, to go ahead and get that process going.
Brett?
Yes, sir.
I know you spoke to the topic of the county highway department spending it efficiently.
Yes, sir.
When this money hits the county highway departments, we are projecting, or I'm assuming that most of the contract pavers are fixing to increase the price considerably because they're going to be flooded with work. How's that going to affect the way that the state views us efficiently spending money? Because to me, that's kind of redundant.
It is, and that's the two-edged sword in this whole thing, Richie, and I'm glad you brought it up. There is a huge concern that that exact thing is going to happen. There are certain areas, and Richie, you happen to be in one that 3-4 counties, maybe there's a single contractor who typically does most of your work among those multiple counties, and single contractors are going to rule the roost. If that's just the nature of it. But in talking through that issue and others with TDOT, we wanted to give each county autonomy in this process to be able to decide on their own how quickly or how slowly you want to roll this out. We know that it's going to drive some prices up. One of the aspects that we're playing around with is the state aid program actually allows for multiple counties to work directly with TDOT to bid together. And I don't mean pull the money together. What's your money is your money. You don't lose any of it. You're not going to get any more from another county. But multiple counties might be able to work through TDOT. TDOT becomes the contracting agent and do it that way in order to possibly have
more purchasing power.
Exactly, more purchasing power, but also multiple vendors, multiple contractors bidding on that your work collectively.
Thank you,
So
Brent.
it is an issue, absolutely, Richie, and it's a concern. TDOT, though, is trying to defer to you and county highway departments as a whole to make those local decisions themselves.
Yeah, and I was at a meeting with Brett kind of after all this passed, and they're talking about that, like you said, a double-edged sword. They don't necessarily want to sit out there and have next legislative session arrive, and of the 300 million, only 20 or 30 million has been spent. And everybody's looking like, well, wait, did they really need that money? So if there are counties that are ready and can put a lot of it to use and get it out the door, they kind of want to see that the money's being put to use right away. But to your point, Richie, that they also are concerned there's going to be places where there's not the capacity. And if you try to spend it all in just the first year, first 18 months, it's not going to go as far because of your point about price inflation and other issues. So they're understanding about both of those. Yeah, and trying to provide as much flexibility as they can.
One of the other issues, it's not just about contractors doing the work, but it's also about the supply, the materials. The question now becomes, is all this or other materials that are suddenly needed as well? You know, we're coming out of a pandemic, and we had real supply chain issues. Have we progressed far enough along to be able to totally meet the needs? Because do keep this in mind, it's not just us. We're getting this huge pot of money all at once, but so is TDOT. So, you know, we are potentially competing with them. And in the highway world, I can't tell you how many stories I've heard along the way about you know, you're basically at the mercy sometimes of that contractor who wins the bid, who has also won the bid on a state contract that pays a whole lot more. And at the end of 6 months, the contract is canceled for the county. So we lose. We've sat on this for so long, and yeah, multiple issues, multiple variables. Someone just posted in the chat, do we know the local county distribution for the state aid road program? I do. in fact, a spreadsheet, and I will share that with David and Wes and see if we can't get that out to everybody. I will be honest with you, I think I feel pretty confident we've shared it on our TCSA website. Cannot point to it exactly right this minute, but we'll get that out there. So, anything else? From what the feedback that I received from many of the people who are wanting to move very quickly are the ones who are doing their own state aid work. Not all. Some are spacing it out because of other obligations, but a lot of counties want to who do their own work on state aid roads want access to all of it quickly. So they're gonna move quickly. Keep in mind that even after a county uses its part of the $300 million, right this minute, TDOT is committed to still appropriating its the same 21 million to the program each year following that. So even though you've used the larger pot of new money, you'll revert back to the same as you have in the past. So if there are there any other questions, I'll ask it that way and I'll wrap it up.
So you're basically telling us now to go ahead and load your budget with the full amount that's been allocated on the previous sheets?
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was going to be where I ended. It was on the budget, and don't want to put any of anybody from CTAS on who might want to chime in as well. When somebody asked me that, I would say, one, talk to your state aid coordinator first. Talk to your CTAS field rep in the process as well. Because you have to effectively create a 3-year plan, it may be difficult for you to put a rock solid number in your budget as you're required to do before July 1st. So what I have been recommending on the basis of talking with CTAS field staff is go ahead and budget what you have in the past, with the understanding that you will very likely have a budget amendment come in soon once you nail down that 3-year plan. So I wish I could tell you, I don't know the individual circumstances of one county over another one, how quickly you're wanting to move this out, but make sure you work with CTAS, your state aid coordinator, to come up with that plan so that you know better how to budget. So I hope that answers your question. That's probably as much as anything. How much am I getting? And then how do I budget it is the next question. So work with those entities. And okay. Is there anything else? Okay. I don't think that was a question. So, David, unless you've got something else.
I think that's it. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So if we've recorded this, we'll be editing it and getting it ready to post out onto the website. So if somebody from your county wants to see it, or you want to share it, like if you're a highway superintendent, you want to share it with your commissioners or whatever, we will have that link out there shortly. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and glad we didn't have any problems today. And we'll see you all hopefully soon in May.
All right. Thank you all.